Well, the history of this state and certainly of this city is one of people who have built out of nothing. I remember passing the Murrah building a few minutes before 9 o'clock, saw the Ryder truck sitting there, and did not think anything about it. A few minutes later, there was this tremendous explosion. We knew something incomprehensible had occurred.
Those 168 chairs outside are not tombstones. They're representative of the lives taken from us too soon.
Before we had the panelists speak, I wanted to give you guys a brief introduction to what was going on in Oklahoma City prior to the bombing. I understand that you had a pretty good introduction to the MAPS program last night, and so we're not going to go too far into that, but certainly our panelists are going to be very knowledgeable on that topic as well, and we can ask them some questions as follow-up. One of the really key moments in the history of our city was the Penn Square Bank collapse that occurred in the early 1980s. And that was related to some loans that were parlayed up into larger banks across the country, Seattle, Chicago, that eventually led to the collapse of several banks. So at a local level, that had a tremendous impact on our economy for a very long time, throughout the 80s. During various research, I've seen numbers that 5 of our 6 major city banks collapsed during that time. Across the state, we had over 130 banks collapse. And when you talk to people that were of the age that were starting to move into the working world, there really is a sense of a lost generation of professionals that would have been starting in the 1980s. And there also was this large loss of civic pride as a result. There was a sense that, and throughout the time, the city leaders tried various things to try to kind of continue to get people to view the value of reinvesting. And that's why the story of MAPS is so much more powerful, is because led by people like Mary Norick, there was finally an effort to see the value of starting to invest through that first MAPS program. So this photo, we could have shown you a series of different photos of what our downtown looked like, and I think Jim has some interesting insight into what he felt like our downtown looked like, and certainly Ron and Kathy can address that as well later. But this just kind of gives you a sense of, this is our Bricktown urban warehouse district. It was really our first district to revitalize and to brand itself with a strong name. And so at that time of the bombing, this would have already been a few years into its revitalization, but there still was a lot of missing teeth. There was a lot of opportunity for redevelopment. And this was really the story of all over our downtown. If I were to show you photos of our Auto Alley district that is along Broadway, it was a lot of pawn shops and check cashing places, a lot of vacancy on one of our primary streets through our downtown. So MAPS gets voted in the early 90s. In a couple of years, so this is MAPS. It passed $350 million. So it passes in, I think, 92, 93, 93. And so you notice that the first project didn't really come out of the ground until 1998. So there is this period where the public is seeing that the money's collected. There is certainly a lot of questions that start getting asked around that time. And so the bombing happens in 95. And so there really hasn't been anything that's come out of the ground yet. And that becomes a major point after the bombing of whether or not that could have been a big turning point for our community about whether or not we continued down this path. And you start having people actually run on the idea of maybe ending MAPS prematurely, or just not continuing to the full vision of what was promised. So this is the Murrah bombing. Prior to the bombing, the Murrah building prior to the bombing. Of course, you saw this in the video of what it looked like during the rescue recovery efforts. What we wanted to talk about today, because you're going to get a good chance to see a lot more of this at the museum if you do get a chance to go inside. But I wanted to show you some images that we don't show so much, which is the damage that occurred across the rest of our downtown. So the overall impact, 169 people killed. There were over 1,000 displaced employees, $150 million estimated total repair costs, which in today's dollar would be almost $308 million. And the economic impact was viewed in hundreds of millions of dollars. This is the image on the left, the black and white image. That is a series of images that the panel themselves took during their trip. And these are all buildings that were catty corner or across the street from the Murrah building itself. You'll see on the one on the right, most of the windows in the church have been blown out. That was a very common issue that most of the buildings dealt with were the loss of windows, some structural damage. The museum itself is in the Journal Record building. That's the building there on the left. So that photo, it's kind of hard to see it, but that photo shows a lot of the window damage on it. And that the photo on the right would have show you the cars that were across the street, as well as the survivor tree, which I'm sure you'll get a chance to see. This is our old YMCA. This was a really fun find from a historical standpoint to see the inside of that, because I had actually never seen what the damage was like inside. So they did have a nursery in the upper right. There's a very touching story if you go through the museum about parents arriving on site and being confused because they're directed to the nursery. Of course, there was a nursery in the Murrah building itself, and they were directed to the children that were at the YMCA nursery. So you can see, if you imagine being a parent, that you've got that damage inside the nursery itself, inside of the gymnasium. That there's actually some photos there of shards and some of the workout equipment. So this map shows you the full extent. To give you some sense of distance, the yellow is the Murrah building itself, and that's on the south side of Fifth Street. And that map ends on the north at 13th Street. So that's almost 8 city blocks away that you have damage to the north, and really in every direction. And so if you tour any of our historic buildings in downtown, surely the question or the topic eventually comes up about what sort of damage they may have been dealing with, especially in a lot of the churches. So overall impact, shortly after that, I had a chance to give Lynn and Jim a tour this morning, and we ended up having something put in place called the Murrah Revolving Loan Fund that assisted many of these buildings in their attempts to rehabilitate. So some of this data is from that Murrah revitalization program. So 330 buildings were damaged, 15 were destroyed or demolished. There were 269 applications for assistance submitted, and 169 of those were funded. And over 200 separate structures were repaired. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So very first, we have Jim Klingbeil, and I'm going to read just a short bio on Jim. He is currently chairman of Klingbeil Capital Management, the investment manager for multifamily value-added investment funds and other Klingbeil family investments. In 1958, while attending Ohio State University, something we share, Jim built a 19-unit garden apartment. This was the first step in a more than 60-year career developing multifamily and residential products. Subsequently, he and the entities have affiliated, developed, acquired, managed, and sold 185 diversified apartment communities totaling over 43,000 units in 47 metropolitan markets. Throughout his career in real estate, Jim has been an industry leader. A particular import is his involvement in the Urban Land Institute, of which he was a president from 1991 to 1993, served on various committees, and as a trustee for over 30 years. So Gab, a round of applause for Jim.
Thanks.
And then our other out-of-town guest is Professor Lynn Sagelin, and she is the Earl W. Kazis and Benjamin Shore Professor Emerita of Real Estate at Columbia Business School, as well as a real estate professional. She has authored several articles and books on the topic of urban redevelopment in some of New York's most important spaces. Most notably, in 2016, she published Power at Ground Zero, Politics, Money, and the Remaking of Lower Manhattan, which received continuous praise and is regarded as the definitive account of that rebuilding challenge. Her earlier books include Times Square Roulette, Remaking the City Icon, Downtown Inc., How America Rebuilds Cities, and Times Square Remade. I just want to give her a round of applause. Thank you for joining us. And then our two in-town guests that are going to add some additional history to the conversation today. Kathy O'Connor is the founder of the Coalign Group, providing expertise in real estate development and specializing in navigating complex financing structures entitlements, and municipal processes. Prior to founding the Co-Align Group, Kathy served as president of the Alliance for Economic Development of Oklahoma City, a nonprofit corporation designed to coordinate public participation in economic development projects. In her role as the president of the Alliance, Kathy has been instrumental in furthering development throughout Oklahoma City and promoting job creation. She led the efforts to create tax increment finance districts and was instrumental in many key downtown projects, including the Omni Convention Center Hotel to complement the new Map City Convention Center, redevelopment of the Skirvin Hotel, which we're in today, and the GE Global Energy Research Facility, and several projects at Tinker Air Force Base. Thank you, Kathy. And then last but not least, Ron Bradshaw began his career in banking, real estate development, and manufacturing. In August of 2001, he and his son founded Colony Partners, a real estate development and investment company. They acquired and operated a portfolio of office buildings totaling 200,000 square feet. Colony Partners has developed numerous downtown multifamily projects in the Deep Deuce neighborhood, including the brownstones at Maywood Park, 2nd Street Lofts, and the Maywood Apartments. In 2012, Colony Partners acquired the Page Woodson School from the Oklahoma City Public School System. Built in 1911, it was home to Douglas High School from 1934 to 1954 and stood vacant for nearly 25 years. The property has undergone a $28 million renovation, transforming it into 60 affordable apartment units with an additional 68 affordable units constructed adjacent to the school. Very impressive. Thank you, Ron. So we're going to talk through a couple of things that are the main takeaways from the report. I'm going to encourage Jim and Lynn especially to jump in at any point and with any thoughts that they have, or else I will ask you questions to make you jump.
Not a shy bunch.
Yeah. So there may be some copies laying around on the table. We encourage you guys to take a look at it. Yeah. You mind holding that up so everybody can see it? Yeah. Thank you for the additional copies of that. So this was the study area. I wanted to ask you guys, Jim and Lynn first, what were your initial impressions of Oklahoma City when you first got here?
Well, I met with the mayor Sunday. The way these panels work is we come in about 10 or 12 of us Sunday evening, and then spend the rest of the week both studying, analyzing, trying to learn, doing a tremendous number of interviews. And then on Friday afternoon, we sort of give our results. As chairman, I can tell you, like on Wednesday night, I thought, we will never make it. Never make it. But the mayor said to me when we met on Sunday night, he said, well, what do you think of our downtown? And I said, where is it? And he took a little umbrage at that. But honestly, it was laid out in 1895, I mean, as I recall, and it was not, and we had 3 land planners on our panel. They looked at all of there really were no parks to speak of in Oklahoma City, as an example. And they just thought about the vacant land and the relative cost of the land and thought, my gosh, we can create, one of them talked about Central Park. I thought, whoa, not so fast. But we were there really to hopefully guide and give some direction to Oklahoma City in the recovery of the bombing, and it had not been, as you said, AJ, with the collapse of the banking system, and I mean, you were already kind of down and out anyway, and then the bombing was sort of the last thing. But so we saw a lot of opportunity in the vacant land and in a lot of different things, but we weren't sure. We really didn't appreciate the importance of maps. I mean, we heard about it. There hadn't been any real action, so we kind of had I guess, an inspired view of what you could accomplish. And I just have to give you tribute that you did accomplish. I mean, this is one of the most impactful, I think, panels that has been done by ULI, and it's just amazing to see the Oklahoma spirit, I'll call it, of the private and public and national interest. I mean, you've accomplished a tremendous amount, and just the general enthusiasm and morale of what you have. I mean, you're much more optimistic today than you were in 1995, which is natural. But so my hat's off to what you've accomplished.
I mean, I certainly would echo what Jim said, and just sort of give you a personal cast on it in two ways. One is I was coming from the East Coast, and I didn't have a great vision of what was in the middle of the country. You know, they don't teach geography very well when you're in New York City, and honestly. And so I was just overwhelmed by the scale of the downtown and the expansiveness of it. And I think coming here after the bombing, I personally felt it was a mission. There was something very special about, one, being involved in this panel, and two, the mission of the panel to help Oklahoma City think long-term. And I would add to what Jim said, we were, maybe I should say, naively ambitious. You know, when you come into this kind of panel situation, you really don't know the political culture of the place until you start talking to people and interviewing and learning, and you have to learn really quickly. But we were incredibly ambitious in what we viewed as the potential of this. And I would say, you know, the second point about it is a retrospective point in that, you know, I'm looking at these pictures of the, you know, damage and the collateral damage all around, and my mind is also the echo of 9/11 that, you know, brings to mind all of this. And the importance of resilience and what the city achieved can't really be overestimated, because it's really hard for a city to recover from this kind of traumatic, sudden event. And it takes a long time. And I'm impressed that the first project from MAPS was not that much longer, not much after the bombing. And so it's really quite special to be back here and to celebrate the achievements of what has gotten done. And, you know, turning around a downtown, whether it's a big project or a series of projects, is a decades-long process. And it's not 1 decade. It's usually not even 2, but it's really 2 to 3 decades of what it takes to build the public, political capital to do it, and then the private investment going hand in hand with it. So it's really quite an achievement.
This might be a good time to talk about some of your later work. You, as we mentioned in your bio, you published Power at Ground Zero, Politics, Money, and the Remaking of Lower Manhattan in 2016. I'm curious if you, how these two events in your career maybe connect, or...
Yeah, well, Oklahoma City, when I sat down to write this book, which took 12 years by the time, you know, when you write current history, it takes a long time because history is being made as you go along. But there was no precedent for what this city had to do to build a memorial. And by the time 9/11 and New York City had to think about it, the only precedent that existed was Oklahoma City. And it was a different kind of precedent. I mean, the main difference was that at Ground Zero, we were dealing with a graveyard. We were dealing with a cemetery in which at least 1,200 bodies were never recovered. But I want to just read a short number of points of what we took away from the Oklahoma City process. And Anita Contini, who was running the memorial process for the 9/11 effort, came to Oklahoma City. And what we took away was that not only we took away insights from your process, because we couldn't, you know, it's not one-to-one, but we took away the process. So what were those points? Well, process takes precedence, more so than design. If you don't get the process right, you're not going to have the political cohesion to actually implement it. Enable all voices to be heard. Engage the community. Involve family members of the victims and survivors. Mount a professionally run open call design international design competition with blind submissions judged by a jury that is totally independent, no interference from any kind of politics. Be mindful of the inevitable hierarchy of memorialization that exists between family members and survivors and first responders. That becomes a really touchy issue. Except that the media enfranchises the public to be part of the bereavement community and value the process of developing a mission statement. And the mission statement is really critical. So in New York, we learned a lot from how you people had to pioneer a process that was unprecedented.
Kathy, I'll start with you and then go to Ron. Can you give us any more background in terms of what downtown was like, what you were doing personally during that time, and how you tie into this larger story?
Well, on April 19th, 1995, I was the business manager of the Oklahoma City Fire Department. So I wasn't involved in real estate or any of the things that I would later get involved in. And in fact, managed all of the city's financial recovery from the bombing. So that was my life. At the time of the bombing, when they were doing this panel, I was spending a lot of time with FEMA, mostly. Later, I would become the city's budget director and finance director, and that's when I got involved in economic development and some of the recovery efforts. Helped to manage the Murrah revitalization program while we were still repairing bomb damage, and then later created the revitalization loan fund. So that's where I was in 1995, and later became an assistant city manager, ran all of the city's economic development programs, so was very much involved in some of the public tools that we decided to use to try to revitalize all of downtown and rebuild after the bombing.
How would you characterize downtown back then, prior to the bombing?
There was not much to downtown back then. If you think about it, in 1991 was the first time that we really saw a decline in assessed value. So even though Penn Square Bank failed in 1982, it took the next 10 years for some of those economic impacts to really accrue to Oklahoma City, and where you begin to see a real decline in values. And so that spilled over into downtown. All the long-time financial institutions that were part of our city's history were no longer there. We had different banks. We had major businesses leaving downtown. The IM Pay plan was a big part of urban renewal at the time. So urban renewal had been acquiring property and tearing down historic buildings from back in the late 70s and 80s. And, when I first started working at Oklahoma City, which I'm not even going to tell you when, because I'd like to say I was 12 years old, but I wasn't. We had a really active retail district downtown. The First National Center was full of stores, and we would go shopping at lunchtime. All of that was gone by 1995. So Oklahoma City downtown really was kind of a ghost town. There was a city council person years ago, I.G. Purser, said, downtown is dead and we killed it. So there was a big recognition on the part of the city that we had turned our backs on downtown, and there really just wasn't much to it at all.
Through what at the time was very well-meaning economic development activity. That
all
just
very well intended.
Did not break well for us. Ron is, what I didn't say here is Ron is really, I think, one of our longest champions for adding housing to our downtown area. You have been through so many different iterations of this, and it was fascinating to be going back through this. Ron is one of the few locals actually photographed in the report, and that was one of the reasons we really wanted him, because he was. He did, yeah, direct us.
Right.
So, but Ron was part of what at the time was a downtown steering committee, and I guess did some of the introduction of the panel before they spoke. You want to talk a little bit about what you thought of downtown and that process?
I was in the automotive and automotive parts manufacturing business. I had the Fred Jones companies, and I had we office downtown. I was active on the various commissions and things within the city of Oklahoma City. And I remember there was just a pause when the bombing occurred for weeks afterwards. And I got to say that, God forbid that ever happens to any of your cities or where you live. But we were going downhill anyway. And we, like I said, I was a kid. I was 51 years old, and I thought I was going to retire running this manufacturing operation. And God's providence took me a different way and led me to wondering what I was going to do when I was about 60. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I got acquainted with Kathy, who was coming up through the city of Oklahoma City, and became aware of the urban renewal properties that were owned. But my point is, to go back, I've kind of got off a tangent. My point is that we were headed down anyway. We needed a change in leadership as well, and we got it with some fantastic mayors that provided younger, more unselfish leadership, and reach out to ULI. At the time, I didn't know what ULI was, and I think back now. I'm 80 years old. I think back, what a magnificent thing, and for your communities as well, or anyone in the United States that sees an issue with their city. ULI brings in the most people with the most wisdom and understanding. I can't believe what they picked up on in a week. And yeah, I was head of the steering committee. Mayor Norick asked me to do that. I didn't. I was in the manufacturing business and card business. I didn't know anything. I did, we built a plant and things like that, but I didn't do any commercial development at that point. So it was devastating. I mean, we had Tulsa, Oklahoma laughed at us that we had nothing going for us. But, that's the nature of this part of the country, I guess. We did pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and said, okay, we got to make a change. These guys provided an outline. I didn't even aware of it. Kathy, I was amazed at everything we've done. We followed that, and I never was a part of the agenda or reviewed the agenda. You did, and the city, but guys like me that were just out trying to make a living, I wasn't aware of all these things. But I got the bug and worked with Kathy on developing some of this vacant urban renewal land, but it was bad, and there's a real sense of pride right now. A lot of things happen possible here, but this was the beginning of it.
That's a good intro. So I had an opportunity to research several of the individuals on this panel. And I really want to say this was, I think, a truly a blue ribbon panel. And I think it really goes to the work that ULI at the time. And Jim, I assume you had some role in helping pick some of this. I don't know if there's anything you want to do to preface this, but I've got a couple of things I wanted to shout out on some of the panel.
Well, one of the things about the panels is the chairman doesn't really have much role. The ULI staff tries to get the best possible individuals, and unfortunately or fortunately, the chairman inherits them, and then tries to amalgamate and create a team in 5 days. And these were, as Lynn said earlier today, we were talking about, there are some really, really strong personalities involved on this particular panel. I mean, Albert Ratner, for example, was Forest City Enterprises out of Cleveland, Ohio, and really single-handedly that company did a lot of the Cleveland renewal. Charlie Shaw was one of the leaders in Chicago politics and development, et cetera. And Marty was from Enterprises. I mean, it was really a very experienced visionary group. I mean, with a lot of city building experience. I may have missed something.
Yeah. Just to piggyback on some of those. So you mentioned Albert Ratner, Charles Shaw was involved in both the development of the United Nations Plaza and Lake Point Tower, which is probably the furthest north tower if you're looking across the lake at the Chicago skyline. Has been home to numerous celebrities in Chicago. Right. Louis Bolin was part of the team that started the ULI Emerging Trends Report in 1978. I thought that was pretty fascinating for the ULI folks in the room. He has an interesting connection. He wasn't part of this effort, but he actually worked at Victor Gruner International, who were that was the company that updated the infamous pay plan in 1974. Martin Millspaugh, he was incredibly prolific. He was a reporter, won a Pulitzer in Baltimore. Became involved with James Rouse, which should be a very important name for many in the redevelopment world, including the development of the Baltimore Harbor. See, what was the other one? And then lastly, Homer Russell. And I want to just briefly mention Homer, who was beloved. If you ever get a chance to read the Boston newspaper article upon his death, he died in 2014, but he actually was raised in Great Bend, Kansas, and I kind of went down a rabbit hole. So Homer was involved in the Big Dig project in Boston, which reconnected Boston to its waterfront. But in going down that rabbit hole, I realized that his sister, Susan Russell Stewart, is in Oklahoma City. She's joining us here at the front table. And Susan actually ended up working with several of at a nonprofit that helped several of the bombing survivors in the years after, and recently was the full marathon. The full marathon. What year was that?
I had dark hair.
But we wanted to thank her for joining us. Really appreciate it. I told her that I would be very pleased if people talked about me the way they talked about Homer in this article and all he did as a community planner and designer for Boston. Lynn, is there anything else you would add about the panel members that we haven't touched on? What it was like with that panel? A lot of strong opinions.
You know, I've been on several panels. This was the most memorable of them, and I would call it the workaholics vacation because you do nothing. It's like nonstop work. And there is something, there's a dynamic to that you don't experience in your everyday work life. And, you know, layered on top of what I call the mission of doing something special for downtown. And it was a blank slate, as both Ron and, Kathy said, so that what's striking to me when you took us on the tour was the amount of housing. And we, in the report, talked about the need for housing. You really can't revive a downtown on the basis of commercial development. You need people. You need people to be there as much of 24 hours a day as possible. And we were being very visionarily aggressive in saying in the housing because it was really a hope and a prayer. When you looked at downtown 30 years ago to believe that there would be now, 11,000 people when there were what, Jim, 514?
Well, there's 514 living dwellings downtown, which now occupied by something 5,600 dwellings today, 20% of which this gentleman built. I've been involved in a lot of redevelopment over the years. I've built a lot of apartments. I've operated in a lot of cities. And the key to rejuvenation of downtowns is apartment dwellers, because they're the people that grease, if you will, or that go to the restaurants, go to the bars, go to the theater events. All of a sudden, all the cultural stuff. Because let's face it, they come home from work and they're out. And I really, really try to stress that. And ownership, when you first start rejuvenation, which I can tell you, I think I was right, it's hard to get ownership. We had one particular, is it Catherine Wild? She felt we should get home ownership downtown. We couldn't get people downtown. So, and I kept saying, they should go to schools in downtown. We did a survey. There weren't any schools downtown. because there weren't any need for them. And so the multifamily thing, we were pretty ambitious with it. I think there's still room because what happens is that it's sort of a life cycle. Once it gets started, it keeps growing and getting better. But so they've accomplished that, and I think it's made a real difference because you now see a vibrancy down here, and the hotels have helped. I mean, I think the Scribner was closed. There was one other one that was occupied, and there was no effort to pull the people in off 40 and 35. I mean, here you have this gigantic interchange, and you didn't even know it was here. And so we recommended signage. Well, I guess we'll get to that. We recommended signage and trying to make it more welcoming, and you've accomplished that in spades, which is, a tribute to you.
So let me wrap up on this thought. I didn't even mention Daniel Biederman, who is probably one of the most recognizable names on this list.
Without question.
Daniel Biederman, very famous for the redevelopment of Bryant Park in New York City. Their approach there in terms of the public-private partnership that brought that park is now being reused across the country, including locally with some of our major public spaces. And then you mentioned Catherine Wild. She at the time, I guess, was a pretty big housing advocate. I gather.
Still is.
Yeah.
Still is.
Now she has been named one of the most powerful women in New York City. And she's with, is it the Partnership for New York City?
Still runs it.
Representing the major CEOs across the New York City region. So incredibly fascinating career from her as well.
Not too bendable in terms of her views.
Not too.
We were all strong voices.
Do you? We have a couple photos to run in just to see if this triggers anything. Does this remind you guys of anything here?
The people. Charlie.
Charlie telling him what to do. That's what he did.
That's what it's.
So what I'll mention on this one, which we'll talk about later, but they actually did recommend keeping the fence. I don't know if that was an idea that came from the panel or if that was something that came from the community, and you said that's just a really good idea, but that has become a major part of the experience for everyone, and I know that they have to take off things off that fence because it fills up so frequently, and they put it into storage.
I would add one thing. One of the real lessons of urban renewal was that you can't demolish history completely. And there was a sense that preservation was an integral part of redevelopment, and that sort of evolved clearly in the late 70s. So by the time you have something like this, I think of preserving the fence as part of the importance of history in reminding people of the past and how the future is different because of the past. And so I don't remember the origins of why we said that, but that's my current interpretation.
Yeah, I think in the times I've interacted with staff at the memorial, there really is a sense that this is the people's memorial. This is organic. This is what just came across overnight, and it would be very easily to have it replaced with the larger master plan.
The trees exist.
Yeah, the survivor tree. So there's Ron. We did find evidence of Ron in the lower left picture there. Yeah. And Jim, that's you, the bottom right.
Yeah. Because I wouldn't recognize it.
So you did some great graphics at the time. They feel so very mid-90s there. Actually, we were pursuing something this week, and I was like, let's do something like this. We never do these things anymore. The one that really jumps out at me is the golf course, and that was actually an idea that came up again in Quarter Shore. We had people telling us to do golf courses down there too. Anything that triggers for you guys?
You had a lot of land. And remember that this was 30 years ago, so that some of these recommendations, like the golf course, are dated.
Yeah.
But we were striving to figure out what to do with all this land that would create immediate activity. Okay? Because that's the most important thing, is to get a momentum going.
I thought it was a great idea.
Well, we wanted to close the concourses, which was not passed. I mean, didn't happen. But the reason we did was we wanted people out doing things, and you had a lot. open spaces you had were pretty empty, so that was part of the bargain. By the way, that young lady at the podium there,
Is that you? Okay. You also, I noticed, you proposed a park. It looked like going several blocks to the north from the original bombing site as well.
Near the memorials.
Yeah.
yeah.
And interestingly enough, that that did not occur, but we did end up talking a lot about the Hardy spine in the lead up to Quarter Shore, and that, of course, played which would have been one street over, and that did end up becoming one of the primary elements of what became the Quarter Shore Park to the south, and I think that came up in the Devon building design as well. So we're going to talk you through some of the recommendations we think we took. You guys can argue with us if you want. They told us we needed to convert our one-way to two-way, which was finally achievable once I-40 came down. They recommended that we relocate I-40 to the south, which we did. At that time, it was still very much taking shape. It would be another decade before that would fully be realized. They proposed a streetcar that would include the Murrah site. That took us well over 20 years, I think, to get to, but we got to that. And then in terms of organizational placemaking, they said that we should be more creative in marketing to promote our downtown districts. We started a downtown bid in 2001, and they went about starting to brand the different districts to have their own personality. And then also to create and strengthen our downtown districts was that second bullet. And then lastly, they suggested we create a mural gateway to Bricktown under the Santa Fe overpass. And I think this always kind of blows me away that we actually did that. Not exactly blows an arch. What's that?
It blows me away. That's Tony Gazzardo. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's another one where I'm like, did somebody suggest that and the panel picked up on it, or was that Tony's idea and we picked up on it?
I think he drew that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that came out of the panel.
Some draftsmen on our panel.
We had 3 land planners, and they just went crazy.
So is there anything else on there that, and I'll throw this to Ron and Kathy, is there anything else that?
I would say that underlying that the points about organization placemaking was the need to leverage the kind of leadership that existed in the community and to unify, as Kathy did in bringing those organizations together, because it's one thing, it's relatively, it's an easier job to create a plan. It's much harder to implement it. And the implementation is what makes it happen. And the leadership and the single focus organization is absolutely essential. And plus the political capital that goes along with that and the financing. But it's that leadership that you seem to have in spades.
You know, you're so right. And I enjoyed that part of this because cities don't have many risk takers in their governments. And when Kathy became head of all those organizations, she spent a lot of time trying to figure out what developers, how they think, what they need, the tools, and was willing to go and bet her job on so many projects that we did, because it took an education to teach city councils and staff what's needed. It takes someone. I tell you, I'm not sure where we'd be if Kathy O'Connor hadn't been in that position. I mean,
Somebody else.
Developers have
I have, but
then.
you.
Kind of talk about that a little bit. You know, after the bombing, you know, we really began, or at least I did, began to believe that we did have to take some pretty big chances to make things start happening. That it wasn't, you know, maps is one thing, but trying to get the private sector engaged into investment was another challenge. And the Oklahoma financial community is a very, very conservative bunch. And They had just come off of the Penn Square Bank failures, the destruction of the financial industry here. So, and they're still a little bit like that. We still deal with this very cautious, risk-averse financial group in Oklahoma City. So what I remember is putting together a team of people, and it wasn't just me, it was the guy who ran urban renewal at the time, Joe Van Bullard, and me, and Dan Batchelor and Leslie Batchelor, who were in the video, all trying to put our heads together, John Michael Williams, to try to come up with a structure that would make these projects possible. And so, we don't talk about it in the video, but Bricktown became kind of a place where we wanted to try to start. And Bass Pro Shops was one of the first projects that we did together as a team. And it was urban renewal land, the redevelopment authority built that building. We built the building and own it and lease it to Bass Pro. We're probably the only city in the country who ever did that, but we did it because we knew we had to take a chance. So we own that building. They pay us rent. We still own it. They still pay us rent. And it is the reason why a good investment. It's the reason why Harkins Theater is there and the Residence Inn and all of the restaurants. And it's the reason everything else worked. And I mean, I had to stand up in front of city council and say, this is the catalyst. And I knew I would lose my job if I was wrong. And I wasn't, thank goodness, because I kept working there for a long time. And then the next project that was really underway pretty much at the same time was this building. And this is another example. The city bought the building from a private owner. In the report, it talks about there's this private owner who's going to spend $30 million renovating it. That never happened. That guy left the country, literally left the country, and left this building with 6 feet of pigeon poop on the top floors. So the city purchased the building and did a process to select a redeveloper, found a redeveloper. We retained a ground lease, sold the building to the developer, Marcus Hotels. They renovated the building. We had over $15 million in incentives, public incentives in this. We kept an ownership interest. We got ground lease payments and mortgage payments on this building and made our money back. We made recently it sold to a group of local investors. They bought the ground lease out, they bought the loans out, and I think we made about $14 million on top of all of the rent payments and the tax payments that have happened through the years. So, and this was one that really was a big risk. And, but I think because of the work of ULI and because MAPS was going on and because we knew that we had to overcome what had happened through the bombing, we were willing to take a bunch of chances. But it was really this team of people that we then later institutionalized and formalized through the creation of the Alliance for Economic Development that really makes that kind of cooperation and focus possible. And I think we still have that today.
We can tell a whole lot of war stories here. I'm not sure how much people are interested in all that, but the other thing that Kathy is she was fair, but she was hard-nosed. Urban renewal on 10 acres, for example. Urban renewal south of the medical center here. Urban renewal on 10 acres around a vacant school that was built in 1911 and had been vacant for 20 years. And I had just developed some apartments in north of Bricktown. Came to Kathy, I said, look, why didn't someone build apartments down around in the south area around the medical school? And she said, well, there's this school there. It's vacant. And I said, well, why? She says, you figure out a solution for that school, and then you can bid on this 10 acres.
And he did. He did.
I mean, and so.
But I bid on the school too.
But we bid against each other at an auction at the school board. we finally got together. I said, finally, you do it, and I'll do what you want me to it. She agreed, and I found a guy, an oil friend of mine, that put up the $940,000 to buy a school full of asbestos. And my son and I walked out of that. My son Jason said, "Well, Dad, what are we going to do with this?" I said, "I have no idea, but we needed to do this." So, that's what she made you get out and do things and take risk and work, because you knew she had your back on this kind of stuff. So, this, like I said, these are all war stories, but they happen in every community. There's always kind of a lot of rules and regulations you've got to follow. And it seems like, how are we going to ever get through this?
The thing that I think I'm beginning to appreciate now that the Skirvin has been redeveloped for so long is there's not a plaque out there telling that whole story that has sat empty for 25, 30 years, or that Paige Woodson sat empty for 25, 30 years. Those are things that you almost have to say like on a conversational level. And I don't know. Yeah, I wish there was a better way to make sure people understood how hard people fought for those buildings to still be standing. And if you haven't seen Paige Woodson, I really would encourage you guys to take a trip over there. It's very impressive, and Ron is now working on the phases around it to better support it. But that's probably a good pivot on the second half of this with redevelopment recommendations that we took. We think we needed to manage a public land inventory. We needed to offer creative development financing, TIP. They debated where to put the library. They actually said that we should put the library on the site located south from the courthouse, which we did, to reinforce the urban experience there. For those that don't know where our Devon Tower sat, that was an empty parking lot for years and years, and it was being held for a downtown mall that never materialized after we chased all of our retail out of our downtown. And so it became a really great opportunity when the Devon opportunity became available, but there was probably at that time the thought of maybe putting the library down in that block. They recommended preservation of the First National. Hopefully you all have had a chance to walk down to First National and our Santa Fe train station, which we also have done. And then they suggested that we needed an enhanced downtown appeal to families, and we worked on Maps for Kids, our second Maps, a downtown charter school that is now known as John Rex. And then in the memorial, these I thought were especially prescient. They wanted the Journal Building to be the site of the Memorial Museum, which it is. They suggested, as Lynn said, an international design competition for Memorial. It did ended up being designed by a bit of a surprise team, which I assume Carrie will talk about a little bit later. The National Memorial, it was a national memorial that was created through the National Park Service. The parks rangers there are a wealth of information if you get a chance to talk to them. And then also this makeshift fencing mementos serve as immediate memorial and a precursor to the permanent memorial. Anything else on that? What do we do?
It was idea. I'm at the Park Service idea, which I think
I think you may not be fully aware that Park Service as a manager of the memorial is really special, because at Ground Zero, it's not. They were not involved. I think the only explanation I can come up with is that it was a federal building, but we have no input from the feds for the 9/11 memorial. Not, even though we've tried as a city several times, because the expense of running the 9/11 memorial is huge. And so you should feel quite fortunate that the feds are running it in perpetuity, No?
They're not. No. Carrie can explain it, but now the memorial is run by a private foundation.
That's the way it is.
And we hire the Park Service rangers to provide the services. I think I'm getting it right. I'm on her board, but I just joined up.
Whoop. So I can tell you. Whoops.
They were involved very early on. I mean, it was in the early days.
But the Park Service is still on the site.
Yeah.
Yes, but we pay to have them.
Okay.
So one of the ones I thought was really interesting going back and looking at the articles is in that period after 95, so this would have been July of 96, They're still planning, discussing what to do for Memorial. There was actually discussion of reopening Fifth Street, which is probably a pretty crazy idea for many of our locals to understand. And this snippet actually talks about the proponents of keeping Fifth Street closed, using the advisory service panel report as the reason why you should have it closed. So how different that experience could have been if they had taken that path. So these are the recommendations we didn't take. The Galleria site, which I mentioned, was held for retail center that eventually became Devon. The arena location, that would have blocked the convention center expansion. They suggested that we eliminate our, quote unquote, beg buttons, the pedestrian activated crossing signals. We're still fighting that battle for those of us that are urbanists. They suggested the gradual elimination of downtown tunnels. This is an interesting one because I actually had to manage those tunnels for a portion of my career. And instead of eliminating them, we actually kind of doubled down and we redesigned it. And I can say from personal experience, I wouldn't want to be the person who had to explain to the people that do their mall walks down there every single day why the tunnels are going away. Anything you guys want to add on that? Okay. Nobody wants to touch the tunnels?
We just wanted more people on the street, and we didn't care where we got them.
I mentioned the 9-hole community golf course along the river. As I mentioned, creation of an expanded park north of the Murrah site. I think we, to some degree, took that idea and we ended up doing Scissortail Park further to the south, but we recognized that we really didn't have much of a larger gathering space outside of the Mary Gardens at the time. And then this is another interesting one. They suggested that displaced federal agencies should be encouraged to move into vacant office space instead of constructing a low-rise campus north of Central Business District. So this is one that I made sure to show Jim and Lynn on our tour first and foremost, because I know that this was a big fight, especially during Mayor Humphrey's term, to keep the feds in downtown. As you can imagine, they had a lot of strong feelings about moving to something that they felt could be more secure. But we also were dealing with a huge office vacancy problem at that time, and I'm assuming that was also part of what went into this. Anything you guys would add from any of those?
Nope.
Well, the golf course was a good idea, but it got replaced with a world-class Roy.
That's true.
Well, yeah. The other thing I would add is that what our three land planners believed strongly was that when Oklahoma City was settled in 1895, you just didn't provide for parks. And so they wanted parks wherever they could get them. In Scissortail, whatever. I think that's just outstanding. Forget the fact that it's not where we had it. It doesn't make any difference. We just wanted more green downtown, more trees, more of this. And you did that. And then what is it, Scissortail South?
Lower, the lowest.
That to me is outstanding. I mean, it's you're taking that vacant ground at the time and utilizing it.
So I think that was the end of our structured presentation. Before I throw it out to Q&A, is there anything else you guys want to say in terms of your overall experience in Oklahoma City? You got a chance to drive around with me this morning. I asked at the end, do you recognize anything? And you said, not to embarrass you, but to say how much we've changed.
It's enormous. I mean, my vision of 30 years ago was just vacant lot after vacant lot, and extraordinarily wide avenues. And now there are medians, there are trees, there are buildings, there are people on the streets.
I was amazingly impressed. I'd say add more apartments. Other than that, I think you've really done an outstanding job. Outstanding.
I want to point out something about the city of Oklahoma City, I guess. This city has been a boom or bust kind of city because it's been based on natural resources, oil and gas. There's never been a huge amount of capital here. All this, how much do we spend on maps now?
A few minutes ago,
$3 billion.
Yeah.
None of it came from the private sector. None of it came from anyone's capital. it came for a quarter of a penny sales tax, one penny sales tax that the residents in Oklahoma City put on themselves and invested back in the city. And there's always, and there's four corners to this city. And MAPS was intended to improve the life of all the people in all four quarters of the city. And downtown is important. It's the pride of the city, and that's what you guys pointed out. And that's what I think we've tried to do. But MAPS has just been a tremendous spark plug source of capital.
So in closing, there is one last thing we wanted to announce, and ULI asked me to do this. So Jim and his wife, Sally, have recently announced that they are going to donate $1 million to support of the advisory service panel process at ULI, a huge gift. And I don't know if Jim knew that I was going to say that or not.
No.
But we did want to just really thank him for his long-term support of this resource. Jim, I don't know if you want to say anything about how meaningful ASPs have been to you throughout your life, or why you see them as so valuable.
Advisory service panel service, or whatever, it's probably the finest thing ULI does. And the key to it is to have these real estate professionals donate a week of their time at no reimbursement to give the kind of, this particular panel was really fascinating because I knew most of these people individually, but not in a cohesive way. And I'm really proud of what we came up with. Boy, on Monday morning, that when we started, I didn't have any idea that we would come up with what we did. But Oklahoma City is to be given real credit because you actually pulled it off. But I do think these public interest panels, and I think all of you from district councils, you ought to think about the ULI resource. Kelsey down here, we're trying to raise enough money so that we can do these public service panels, let's say 6 a year, where we come and try to help various cities or different kinds of problems. In Columbus, Ohio, we had a penitentiary that had been there since the Civil War right downtown, and its only claim to fame was it burned up 180 people, prisoners, in one of the great fires. And finally, ULI came in and said, knock it down and create in this where our hockey stadium, our hockey arena is. The blue, whatever we call them,
Blue Jackets.
Anyway, Blue Jays.
Blue Jackets.
And we totally restored that. So those are the kinds of things that I think the advisory service can do, and it's a reason for the gift. And we're going to try to follow with some more.